It's finally time. It's alive! It's alive! Yo, Sheed, you good down here? My fault, man. I just built the most powerful gaming PC. It has AMD's 9800X 3D CPU, 64GB of DDR5 RAM, and NVIDIA's RTX 5090, which is just absolutely massive. No wonder the lights kept going on and off. That thing is a beast. You gotta tell me more about this build. For sure, man. Building this thing was really fun, but honestly pretty stressful at times. Even just getting the parts was pretty stressful, but let me tell you all about it. So to give a little bit of background, this is now my second PC build ever. My first PC build was a few years ago when I first created my man cave in my new home, and honestly, it's still a solid build. For that build, I went with the RTX 4070, 32GB of RAM, and AMD's Ryzen 7700X. Also, no RGB for that previous build. I really liked the aesthetic of not having RGB. It really gave off like a stealth vibe. But for this second one, I did decide to go with some RGB lighting. Let me know in the comments which one you like better. Anyway, my previous build was good to me, and it played games at 1440p really well. By no means did I absolutely need an upgrade, but I did want it to try out and see what 4K gaming is actually like. And I had the fun, so I thought, why not? Although my bank account is pretty much depleted now. Little did I know how stressful but exciting this build would be, and I just wanted to tell you the story of this build process, going through all of the parts, and also showing some actual gaming performance after everything was complete. So for planning, I knew I wanted a high-end build for potential 4K gaming, and the most powerful GPU at the time I was planning, which was around December or January, was the RTX 4090. But since the 50 series were right around the corner, and NVIDIA actually stopped producing 40 series cards, causing an artificial GPU shortage and a surge in prices, I just decided to take my best shot on the chances of getting a 5080 instead. Originally, I only wanted to spend around $1,000 for a new GPU. I told myself that if I didn't get the 5080, then I would try to get a 4080 Super for a good price. This was very wishful thinking though, because to this day, I still have not seen a 4080 Super sell for retail, even on the secondhand market. But regardless of which of these exact GPUs I got, I knew I wanted to pair it with the best CPU on the market for gaming right now, which is AMD's 9800X 3D. You've probably seen a lot of people talk about the X3D CPUs and use them in their builds, but some people don't tell you why it's actually so good for gaming. So the quick explanation is that this CPU utilizes AMD's 3D V-cache technology, meaning they were able to greatly increase the cache, which is just fast memory, on the CPU without increasing the overall physical size of the CPU itself. A bigger and faster cache in gaming means that your system is less likely to have to talk to your RAM, which is slower, in order to get the details about the game's environment that is used often, like enemy locations or map objects, etc. Now with the CPU out of the way, the last component that I needed that also impacts performance is RAM, and 64GB of DDR5 6000MHz CL30 RAM is more than enough for this build. I'll get into the other components like the case, the motherboard and stuff soon, but planning for these wasn't nearly as stressful because I live next to a micro center and I knew there shouldn't be any stock issues for things that I needed outside of the GPU. And as long as whatever I got was compatible with the CPU, GPU, and RAM at their best speeds, then everything else should be good. Now actually getting the parts besides the GPU was pretty easy thanks to Micro Center and actually thanks to Corsair. Before I picked the other parts, Corsair reached out to me saying they would love to help me with my next PC build, and I was honestly so hyped and thankful. This is the first time that any brand has reached out to me to help with a PC build, and since Corsair makes pretty much everything outside of motherboards, GPUs, and CPUs, it made this process really simple. This video is not sponsored or anything by Corsair, but I did want to give them a shout out because they did gift me a lot of the components for this build. Starting with the case, I chose the Corsair Frame 4000D Modular series in black. I saw this case at CES as well, and I really liked how versatile this case actually was. For the power supply, I chose the RM1000X, and I went with the 1000 watts because I knew it would be good to power whatever GPU that I managed to get my hands on. For cooling, I got this iCUE Link Titan 360 AIO cooler and a ton of iCUE Link case fans. For RAM, I went with 64GB of Corsair's Dominator RAM, which also came with dummy sticks for lighting and aesthetics. For the memory, I actually had this 2TB Western Digital Black M.2 SSD gifted previously, so I just decided to use that. And for the motherboard and CPU, I bought those myself from Micro Center. I went with the 9800X 3D and this MSI Mag X670E motherboard since it's compatible with the CPU, GPU and RAM, and it also supports PCIe 5, which the 50 series cards also use. And now I had everything ready but the GPU. The 50 series launch date was right around the corner, and I had to make some preparations to ensure that I could get the 5080. I asked the Micro Center employees in person what would be a good time for me to stand in line if I wanted to get one day of launch, and they told me that people would start camping out probably 24 hours before, but if I got there at like 6 a.m. that I should still get one. I also asked the Best Buy employees what would be the best way for me to secure one, and they said unfortunately that they are only doing online sales only, so I would have to try my best luck with that. So I went home, I made sure I had all of the online accounts set up at the major retailers, Newegg, Best Buy, Amazon, NVIDIA, so I could have the best chance online if I couldn't make it in person. The night before the launch came, and I was super tired, and I also had to work at 9 a.m., so I just decided to get some sleep and not try to go to Micro Center at 6 a.m. and instead try online. And I regretted that decision immediately. The next morning at the time of drop, I tried all the retailers online that had the 50 series launch. Best Buy, got in line for their website for the 5080, failed. Newegg, failed. NVIDIA website, failed. I thought maybe if I went to Micro Center around lunchtime that they would still have some GPUs, because not everyone is looking to upgrade a new GPU and they should have enough stock, right? So I went to Micro Center in person, failed. Turns out they only had single-digit numbers of 5090s and maybe 60-ish 5080s for sale at the location that was near me. My excitement for this new build only led to sadness, as my hopes and dreams of getting a 50 series card vanished pretty quickly at that day. But I knew from experience that releases like these usually happen throughout the next few days, so I didn't give up and I kept trying. I actually ended up creating a script on my computer that refreshed Micro Center's website every minute, and it would play an alert if the 50 series ever came back in stock. And I did this because according to their employees, their website was pretty up to date on the stock. So I set up the script to run, and then I kind of forgot about it because I was just so busy with work. A couple days went by and I was taking a break from work during lunch, and I actually heard the alert go off. I checked my PC to make sure it wasn't a fluke, and it actually wasn't. Micro Center actually had 11 5090s in stock, but only available for in-store buying. I couldn't buy it online and then pick it up in store. At this moment, I was like, okay, it's $2,600. Should I just cop this, or should I wait for the more reasonably priced 5080? I had to think super fast because I knew this was gonna go out of stock quickly, so then I thought, you know what, screw it, let's YOLO and get the 5090. When I tell you that I've never ran so fast to get my keys and get in the car and drive 20 minutes to a Micro Center, it's the truth. My fiance, who was also home at the time, was so confused and worried why I ran out the house so fast. Once I arrived at the store, I see that there's actually another guy ahead of me walking inside pretty fast, and I knew that he was also gunning for a 5090. We approached the counter around the same time, and he asked for a 5090. I raised my hand behind him, telling the employee that I would like one too, and it turns out I wasn't too late. They had 3 left in stock by the time he and I arrived at the counter, and I immediately felt so much relief. We talked about how excited we were for our new builds, and even met a third guy who secured the last 5090 as well. We all took a picture together on that day, and as we were walking out of the store, we kept getting stopped by multiple people asking us if they still had any more stock left. It was honestly a great win. I drove back to my house and let it sit next to the other components until I was ready to build this weekend. Oh, and by the way, now with all of the components gathered, here is the total number in terms of cost for this build. Even though I was gifted a lot of components, I still ended up spending over $3,000 just for the core components, which could be used to buy a very, very good gaming PC nowadays if it wasn't for the 5090 card. The building process itself wasn't too bad, honestly. My first PC build took me around 6 hours to complete, and this was mostly because I was taking my time reading all of the instructions and taking breaks in between, but this one was a lot faster. I unboxed the Corsair Frame 4000D case first. It was beautiful. I love the glass panel on the side and the front grille / intake area. I really like the design. Then I took out the motherboard from its packaging and started to install the components. Also, this was my first time trying out one of those anti-static fans. I thought it would be good because my basement is completely covered in carpet and it generates a lot of static, but honestly, it just ended up being too annoying to work with. So instead, I just removed my socks, stood on my plastic chair mat, and ensured that from time to time, I was actually touching my old build PC to discharge any static that I may have built up. Now, I was probably being a little bit too careful because even if there was a little bit of static, the components should have been fine. But when you're working with these expensive components, you do not want to take those chances. The CPU, RAM, and SSD were the first to install into the motherboard, and it was pretty straightforward and easy. Also, I already had this toolkit that I bought from iFixit at Best Buy, which was pretty much all I needed to screw anything in. Next, I was onto my very first AIO installation, the iCUE Link Titan, and this was surprisingly easy as well. The only extra step that was really needed was fitting the radiator and mounting it inside the case, which I put on the side at first. Next, I attempted to install this ridiculously large MSI Gaming Trio 5090 GPU, and this is where I noticed my first issue that I mentioned before. Once I slotted it into the motherboard, I noticed that the GPU was too close to the radiator fans for the AIO, and it would probably been fine, but I didn't like the way that it looked. Also, the tubes connected to the AIO were being pinched a lot by the GPU, so I decided to move the AIO to the front of the case in order to give it some more breathing room. Once I moved it to the front, it was a lot better, but I still didn't like how much the GPU was pressing against the tubes, and I thought that I could probably solve this by vertically mounting the GPU instead, but at the time I did not have a riser cable in order to vertically mount the GPU, so I had to stick with this. Luckily, the case does already support vertically mounting a GPU, and I wouldn't need to buy a bracket or anything like that. I would just need the PCIe riser cable. I found this PCIe riser cable on Amazon that I purchased and installed later, and it made things much better. I'll make sure to leave this in the description as well. Also, one thing to note, Corsair also gave me some reverse fans, which are really cool because if you ever try turning around normal fans in order to switch them from outtake to intake, you'll notice that it actually really isn't that aesthetically pleasing since some of the fan is blocked by the cage and you don't really get to see all the nice lights. But with reverse fans, you can still have everything look good if you want the airflow to go in the opposite direction, and they cost the same price. Finally, connecting everything to the PSU and doing some cable management wasn't too bad with this case. I really appreciated how much space there was to fit all the wires between the case, and there were actually Velcro straps on the back side panel to help keep everything tidy. I am no expert in cable management by any means, so once I made things neat enough, it was all set to go. All I had to do was turn it on and actually do some gaming and testing. The first time I turned the PC on, it worked flawlessly, and I was actually surprised because, you know, maybe this is just me as a pessimist and as a programmer, but things don't usually work on the first try. We did it! Yay! I made a bootable version of Windows on my thumb drive, plugged it into the computer and installed Windows, and I also had to update the BIOS because it wouldn't work properly with the 9800 XGD if I didn't do so. Then all I had to do was download Steam and all of my games, and we were off to some testing. I'll take some time now to show some gameplay with actual raw performance, no frame generation, no DLSS, and I know that one of the big selling points for NVIDIA and the 50 series cards is the support for multiple frame generation, and I'll probably dedicate another video for that. So if you want to see that, just be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll make sure that that is the next video that I work on. Overall, the raw performance that I was seeing in games was honestly insane. I play a mix of competitive shooters and RPG games, and they looked amazing in both 1440p and 4K, and the frame rates were very good and respectable as well. Though for Black Myth Wukong, I'm still shocked that I couldn't get a triple-digit frame rate even with the 5090 for raw performance, but that's probably more of a comment on the game itself and not the 5090. I think that game is probably just really unoptimized or just uses a ton of resources. I also tried to do some undervolting with this GPU with MSI Afterburner in order to draw less power and gain a little bit more efficiency, but honestly the NVIDIA drivers and MSI Afterburner itself still seems to be a little bit buggy, so I think I'll wait for more updates to come before trying these again. Thank you so much for tuning in again, and I'll catch you on the next one.